Okay, folks, so what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about Aristotle and his theory of ethics. So let's pull up the PowerPoint for that. Oh, I got to remember to hit my share screen here. So let's do that. PowerPoint is called Aristotle. There you can see it there. Already got it nice and pulled up for us here. Just got to, well, this probably works. Let's make sure the share is correct. And looks like we're on it. Let's do it. Okay. So Aristotle was a student of Plato, who was, of course, a student of Socrates. You can see his dates there, 384 to 322 BC. He's the last of the three great philosophers of ancient Greece, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Plato and Aristotle did most of the writing there. Socrates didn't write, so they're much more influential historically. Aristotle influential in every area of human understanding beyond anybody else in Western or maybe even human history. Aristotle influenced every area of study, from the sciences, literary criticism, the arts, and ethics, and politics. And for a long, long time, centuries upon centuries, was considered the guy. In the sciences, he's of course been replaced and superseded, but it took a long time to get past him. So, but in ethics, he's actually still got a lot to say. And for a couple of centuries, he wasn't listened to as much as he had been. And in the last 30 or 40 years, Aristotle has become more popular among philosophers again. And when I teach him, I find a lot of students like him as well. So let's just talk a little bit about his ethical theory and its relationship to some of the themes of our course. So first thing to note is that some philosophers like to contrast between an ethics of duty and an ethics of virtue. Aristotle proposes an ethics of virtue. So an ethics of duty is the kind of stuff you get with Kant and other deontologists primarily, but also to some extent with all the theories we've looked at: social contract theory, libertarianism, utilitarianism, all these theories. These are concerned with actions, how we behave, what do we do, and perhaps even more importantly, what don't we do? Okay, what should I do? What's my obligation? What are the universal moral guidelines? Aristotle doesn't really ask these questions. They aren't really in his radar. He really asks two questions. What kind of person should I be? And he has actually two different ways that connect for him by which he answers that. And what character traits, what traits of character, what good habits of character should I cultivate, should I develop? He calls those virtues. Good character traits that help you be a good person are virtues. Bad character traits that prevent you from being a bad person are vices. Virtues and vices. Okay, so to understand Aristotle, we have to familiarize ourselves with an idea I have mentioned in class before: teleology. Teleology is one way you can explain what a thing is. Aristotle proposes multiple ways to explain what something is. He has a theory is called the four causes. You can explain an object by terms of four different causes. Now, he uses the word cause a little more broadly than we do. He uses the word cause as an explanation. I want to explain what a thing is. I propose one of the four causes. So take this book, The Justice by Michael Sandel. There, you could explain it in four different ways, according to Aristotle. There is the material cause, the stuff that's made out of paper. So one way to explain it, although not a very informative way perhaps, is materially. It's made out of paper. It's efficient cause, what made it, some kind of a printing press, obviously. Or if you want to go back further, Sandel wrote it and typed it up, and said that I didn't type it up, but he, word processed it up, whatever the term should be now. And that's the efficient cause. Sandel wrote it, the printing press produced it, so on. It's formal cause. Well, Sandel had an idea in his head. I want to write a book in this type of a way. That's what formal cause is. I want to write a book about justice, and I want to say this, this, and this. The idea he had in his head, the plan in his head by which he constructed out of his mind the actual book. If you want to think more crudely, the physical book, and the image the publisher had of the book as they put it together for the printing press, or however you want to put that. But the most important thing is the purpose, or telos, T-E-L-O-S, telos of the book. Sandel wrote this book so that we could think deeply about ethics and politics. That's the purpose of his book. And that's the best way to explain what a thing is in terms of its purpose. What is it for? And many, many people throughout history have had a strong sense of teleology. The Greeks had a strong sense of teleology, as did Aristotle. Aristotle had what's called a cosmic teleology, meaning everything in the entire universe has a purpose. It's for something. And these purposes are not God-given for Aristotle. They are later for Jewish, Muslim, and Christian thinkers who are inspired by Aristotle, and everything is made in accordance with the divine plan. But for Aristotle, that's not quite how it goes. For Aristotle, things have natural inbuilt purposes. Everything, not just human artifacts, but everything in the natural, every living thing, every plant, everything. He goes so far as to say, it rains so that the crops will grow. That's the purpose of rain, to grow the crops. Everything has a purpose. So it's a cosmic or universal teleology. And for our purposes, we're going to say purpose, essence, and defining activity are three ways of saying the same thing. Take an axe. The purpose of an axe is to chop wood. The essence of an axe, what an axe most fundamentally is it's a wood chopping tool. Right? Its essence is defined in terms of its purpose. And its defining activity, which is characteristic activity, flows from its purpose too. It chops wood. Do other things, but that's its main purpose, right? So its purpose is to chop wood. That it's an axe, is a wood chopping tool, and furthermore, take the human eye. The human eye, the purpose of the eye is to see. Its essence, it is the sight organ, and its defining activity is seeing things. Okay, you can see the human eyes right there. Virtue and vice are functional terms here. My eyes have a vice. They have astigmatism. I just took my glasses off, and now my screen's blurry. So my eyes are, they have a vice to that degree. Right? If I had 20/20 vision, that would be a virtue. My glasses function quite well. I see quite clearly with them on. So that virtue of glasses will help somebody like me see well. My glasses are virtuous, but my eyes are to some extent vicious. Not vicious like blah, but vicious, having a vice. And things can have be more or less bad, more or less good. The terms good and bad for Aristotle, totally functional terms. That's true even with regard to human beings and human actions. So if everything has a purpose, and our questions, go back a slide, is to know what kind of person should I be? What character traits should I develop? The answer is obviously going to be, I should be the kind of person that lives up to my purpose. And I should develop the character traits that help me do so, the virtues that help me do so, and avoid the vices that get in the way of that. Now, when he says my purpose, he doesn't mean necessarily, or not primarily, my individual purpose, but my purpose as a human being. Right? There's a universal human purpose that we all share. So he begins to ask the question, what are human beings for? What are human beings for? And this is the interesting question for Aristotle. What are human beings for? Well, he argues that humans must have a purpose. Everything does. That's an important argument, but we'll bypass it a little bit. Remember that it's not so obvious, though, what the purpose of a human being is. It's pretty obvious what the purpose of my eyes or my hands are. Our eyeglasses are an axe. It is not so obvious what the human purpose is. So you can't get purpose and essence too easily. But what you could do is you could try to zone in on our defining activity. And Aristotle says if you want to know the defining activity of something, what you need to do is figure out what's distinctive about its activity. So what do human beings do that no other species does, or no other species does anywhere nearly as well? And the most obvious answer is reason, understanding. Human beings have far greater mental capacities. We are far more rational. We're capable of far more abstract thought and far greater understanding of the world than any other animals. There are some intelligent animals out there. Elephants, great apes, particularly chimps and bonobos, dolphins, even some other animals. They know way more than we ever thought they did. But nothing compared to us, right? No animal, as far as we know, even the smartest one, can do geometry or complex mathematics or truly produce the works of art, or architecture, or literature, or music, or even enjoy those things like we can. They can't understand anything about the cosmos we live in or the processes by which life is developed. We're light years beyond any other animal species on this planet. There might be somewhere out there somebody who knows more, but not on this planet. So on this planet, our distinctive feature is our impressive and incredible understanding. And so, to be a good human being is to maximize our mental prowess, is to think well. Okay. Now, how do we know we're doing that? That's a tough one. But one way that we might know is if we're living a truly good life, Aristotle thinks we will truly be happy. So one way to test if we're using our understanding in the way that's proper is, are we happy? Okay, so a bit on that. Next slide. So happiness. Aristotle spends a lot of time in his book, The Nicomachean Ethics, named after his son, Nicomachus. Aristotle's life history is interesting in many ways. Good family man, good citizen. But beyond the scope of our talk, we don't need to go into that. You can always Google Aristotle and learn the facts of his biography. Fascinating stuff. Aristotle says, look, everybody wants to be happy. And the Greek word for happiness is eudaimonia. Okay, really importantly here. Eudaimonia is not necessarily best translated by happiness, at least according to many scholars. So you might think by the term happy, you mean kind of a stress-free and pleasant existence where you just sort of feel good. You have a lot of pleasant sensations and few painful ones. That's a kind of hedonic or hedonistic conception of happiness. It isn't Aristotle's. That is not what Aristotle is about. Okay, Aristotle does not think that just feeling good is what we're really after. Not that that's bad. It's fine to feel good and have pleasure. But by happiness, he means a sort of deep satisfaction with yourself and your life, with who you are and how you've lived and what you've done. Happiness means something like you feel like you've lived authentically and meaningfully. You're deeply fulfilled on that level. You've lived a meaningful, authentic life, something like that. Okay, so when he says happiness, he means I've lived meaningfully. I've lived well. I'm proud of the life that I've lived. So he considers what then is happiness. There are three candidates he very quickly dismisses. One of them is physical pleasure, which again, he says, look, if you thoughtfully pursue pleasure, that's fine. He's not a Puritan. But it doesn't fulfill our higher natures. And human beings are made to think. We have that incredible brain and that marvelous understanding. And physical pleasure is nice, but it doesn't really fulfill that. Plus, it's temporary, and it is kind of shallow. It's not very deep. Success, having a nice house or a good position or the respect of my neighbors or a nice job or whatever, that's too self-focused, and it's external. All those things could easily be taken away. They depend on other people. They don't depend on you, and happiness should come from a deep sense of satisfaction with yourself, not these externals like your reputation, your money, your amount of status. And of course, money is just an instrument to one or two. So if one or two are not true happiness in the deeper sense, then money can't get you that either. So although lots of people, hordes of people, according to Aristotle, chase 1 through 3, and these things aren't necessarily bad, they aren't what life's all about. And we shouldn't think that that's where happiness lies. Instead, happiness lies in the practice of goodness or virtue. The word in Greek, by the way, is arete, A-R-E-T-E, and it means virtue or excellence. So excellence might be a better translation in some ways, that you're talking about traits that are excellent for the thing in question to have. So an excellent trait for an axe to have is that it's sharp. The opposite of an excellent trait, an inexcellent trait, a poor trait, would be dullness. And so virtues are the good traits human beings should have to perform excellently, given their nature as a human being. So an axe needs to be sharp. A human being needs to properly apply their stunning intellect. Okay, so virtue is what happiness is all about. But what is a virtue? Well, virtue is the state of being good, given your human nature, living up to your human nature. And in order to do that, you have to actually cultivate the virtues, the good character traits that allow you to do that. So what are these virtues? Well, very broadly, virtue is a good quality. A vice is a bad quality. But how can we know which qualities count as virtues? Okay. Well, let's play with this a little bit. I've got some stuff here on the PowerPoint, and I've got the definition right here from Aristotle himself. Virtue is a disposition to act, lying in a mean, relative to us, between an excess and a deficiency. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I've got a little chart here. Pay special attention to courage. And there's some other stuff that comes afterwards, but I want to actually watch a video with you real quick together, and we'll comment on it. This is from Crash Course Philosophy, and it's very short, so it's worth watching. Let's log into YouTube here, and let's make sure we're sharing what we ought to be sharing. And get it on YouTube here. I want to share this little video and kind of react to it with you in real time. I think it's a good overview of the part of Aristotle that we are about to cover. So, Crash Course Philosophy, Aristotle. All right. So, Crash Course Philosophy, Aristotle is pretty good. And again, let's make sure we're actually on the right page. Seems that we are. Aristotle and virtue theory. Let's see what's said here, draw some conclusions from it, and then we'll finish off with our own discussion. There'll probably be a silly ad we have to skip for a minute.
Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Wash your hands.
We're about to be able to skip. Well, good news right now during the pandemic, right? Disinfect, disinfect, disinfect. All right, here we go.
Brave but not reckless, generous but
don't worry, I'm going to rewind it.
This is the type of person that everybody wants to.
There we go. And go.
Imagine a person who always knows what to say, who can diffuse a tense situation, deliver tough news gracefully, is confident without being arrogant, brave but not reckless, generous but never extravagant. This is the type of person that everybody wants to be around and to be like, someone who seems to have mastered the art of being a person. This may sound like an impossible feat, but Aristotle believed that while rare, these people do exist, and they are what we should all aspire to be. Virtuous. And there's a whole moral theory based on this idea of virtue. But unlike most of the moral theories we've discussed, virtue theory doesn't spend a lot of time telling you what to do. There's no categorical imperative or principle of utility. Instead, virtue theory is all about character. Rather than saying, follow these rules so that you can be a good person, Aristotle and other virtue theorists reasoned that if we can just focus on being good people, the right actions will follow effortlessly. Become a good person, and you will do good things. No rule book needed. So why should you become a virtuous person? Because eudaimonia. Virtue theory reflects the ancient assumption that humans have a fixed nature, an essence, and that the way we flourish is by adhering to that nature. Aristotle described this in terms of what he called proper functioning. Everything has a function, and a thing is good to the extent that it fulfills its function and bad to the extent that it doesn't. This is easy to see in objects created by humans. A function of a knife is to cut, so a dull knife is a bad knife. And a function of a flower is to grow and reproduce, so a flower that doesn't grow is just bad at being a flower. And the same goes for humans. We're animals, so all the stuff that would indicate proper functioning for an animal holds true for us as well. We need to grow and be healthy and fertile. But we're also the rational animal and a social animal, so our function also involves using reason and...
I'll say more about being rational and social after we watch this video. That's extremely important. Right? We're animals, and we do need to survive and grow and reproduce our kind and so on. That's part of our function. But more importantly, we're rational and social. Right, so our function involves using reason and getting along with others. Much more on that in a few minutes. So far, he's basically saying, look, this is teleology. It's basically what we went over. He's about to go to the material we were just about to get to in the PowerPoint.
getting along with our pack. Now, you might notice that some of this sounds a lot like parts of natural law theory, Aquinas' theory that God made us with the tools we need to know what's good. Well, Aristotle had a strong influence on Thomas Aquinas, so part of Aristotle's thoughts on virtue theory ended up in natural law theory. But for Aristotle, this isn't about God's plan, it's just about nature. Aristotle argued that nature has built into us the desire to be virtuous, in the same way that acorns are built with the drive to become oak trees. But what exactly does it mean to be virtuous?
That's where we are
Aristotle
now.
said that having virtue just means doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way, in the right amount, toward the right people. Which sort of sounds like Aristotle saying exactly nothing. I mean, how vague can you be? But according to Aristotle, there's no need to be specific because if you're virtuous, you know what to do all the time. You know how to handle yourself and how to get along with others. You have good judgment. You can read a room and you know what's right and when. Aristotle understood virtue as a set of robust character traits that, once developed, will lead to predictably good behavior. You can think of virtue as the midpoint between two extremes, which Aristotle called...
This is, in fact, exactly how you should think of virtue. Move myself a little higher here. Right? Mean between two extremes. The virtue is the middle state, but it is the middle state not just in general, but relative to each individual. Right? So take courage as your virtue. What is courageous for me might not be the same for you. And it differs from situation to situation, too. So for a given individual in a particular situation, there's a nice mean or middle state, as it were, between too much of a quality and too little. The exact right amount is the virtue. Right? So he says you can think of virtue as the midpoint between two extremes, both of which Aristotle calls vices.
Vices. Virtue is just the right amount, the sweet spot between the extreme of excess and the extreme of deficiency. And this sweet spot is known as the golden mean. So let's take a look at some particular virtue.
Aristotle never calls it the golden mean, but philosophers have always done so for some reason.
Starting with courage. What is courage? To take a closer look at this, let's head to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. Walking home from a movie, you see a person being mugged. What is the courageous action for you to take? Your impulse might be to say that a courageous person would run over there and stop the mugging because courage means putting yourself in harm's way for a good cause, right? Well, no. A virtuous person, in the Aristotelian sense, would first take stock of the situation. If you size up the mugger and have a good reason to believe that you could safely intervene, then that's probably the courageous choice. But if you assess the situation and recognize that intervention is likely to mean that both you and the victim will be in danger, the courageous choice is not to intervene, but to call for help instead.
And that depends on who you are, right? If you're Chuck Norris, go stop the mugger. If you're the proverbial, 98-pound Linkley or whatever they used to call it, you probably better call for help.
According to Aristotle, courage is the midpoint between the extremes of cowardice and recklessness. Cowardice is a deficiency of courage, while recklessness is an excess of courage, and both are bad. Aristotle said that you definitely can have too much of a good thing. So being courageous doesn't mean rushing headlong into danger. A courageous person will assess the situation, they'll know their own abilities, and they'll take action that is right in the particular situation.
That's well
put. Part
of
having courage, he argued, is being able to recognize when, rather than stepping in, you need to find an authority who can handle a situation that's too big for you to tackle alone. Basically, courage is finding the right way to act. And a lot of the time, but not all of the time, that means doing a thing that you know you're capable of, even if doing it scares the pants off of you. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Aristotle thought all virtue works like this. The right action is always a midpoint between extremes. So there is no all or nothing in this theory, even honesty. In this view, honesty is the perfect midpoint between brutal honesty and failing to say things that need to be said. Like, no one needs to be told that they have a big zit on their face. They already know. The virtue of honesty means knowing what needs to be put out there and what you should keep quiet about. And it also means knowing how to deliver hard truths gracefully, how to break bad news gently, or to offer criticism in a way that's constructive rather than soul-crushing. The virtue of generosity works the same way. It avoids the obvious vice of stinginess, but also doesn't give too much. It's not generous to give drugs to an addict, or to buy a round of drinks for everyone in the bar when you need that money for rent. The right amount of generosity means giving when you have it to those who need it. It it can mean having the disposition to give just for the heck of it, but it also means realizing when you can't or shouldn't give. So now you can see why Aristotle's definition of virtue was totally vague. Where that golden mean is depends on the situation. But if you have to figure out what virtue is in every situation, how could you possibly ever learn to be virtuous? Aristotle thought there was a lot that you could learn from books, but how to be a good person was not one of them. He said that virtue is a skill, a way of living, and that's something that can only really be learned through experience. Virtue is a kind of knowledge that he called practical wisdom. You might think of it as kind of like street smarts. And the thing about street smarts is that you got to learn them on the street. But the good news is you don't have to do it alone. Aristotle said your character is developed through habituation. If you do a virtuous thing over and over again, eventually it will become part of your character. But the way you know what the right thing to do is in the first place is by finding someone who already knows and emulating them. These people who already possess virtue are moral exemplars. And according to this theory, we are built with the ability to recognize them and the desire to emulate them. So you learn virtue by watching it and then doing it.
So you find a moral exemplar. So for Aristotle, might be Socrates. What would Socrates do if he were here right now? WWSD, right? What would Socrates do? That's a moral exemplar. These moral heroes whose lives you study and watch and emulate and learn from.
In the beginning, it'll be hard and maybe it'll feel fake because you're just copying someone who's better than you at being a good person. But over time, these actions will become an ingrained part of your character. And eventually, it becomes that robust
the more you try to be a virtuous person, in other words, the more virtuous you become. Just like if you train for an athletic or strength competition, you actually become more athletic and stronger.
Trait that Aristotle was talking about. It'll just manifest every time you need it. That's when you know you have virtue, fully realized. It becomes effortless. Okay, but why? What's your motivation? What if you have no desire to be the guy who always says the right thing or the lady who always finds the courage when it's needed? Virtue theory says that you should become virtuous because if you are, then you can attain the pinnacle of humanity. It allows you to achieve what's known as eudaimonia. This is a cool Greek word that doesn't have a simple English translation. You might say it means a life well lived. It's sometimes translated as human flourishing. And the life of eudaimonia is a life of striving. It's a life of pushing yourself to your limits and finding success. A eudaimonistic life will be full of the happiness that comes from achieving something really difficult rather than just having it handed to you.
That's a good way of putting it.
Choosing to live a eudaimonistic life means that you're never done improving. You're never to a point where you can just coast. You're constantly setting new goals and working to develop new muscles. Choosing to live life in this way also means you'll face disappointments and failures. Eudaimonia doesn't mean a life of cupcakes and rainbows. It means the sweet pleasure of sinking into bed at the end of an absolutely exhausting day. It's the satisfaction of knowing you've accomplished a lot and that you've pushed yourself to be the very best person you could be. This is morality for Aristotle. It's being the best person you can be, honing your strengths while working on your weaknesses. And for Aristotle, the kind of person who lives like this is the kind of person who will do good things. Today we learned about...
All right, so I'll send you this video too. You can watch the summary, which goes on for about a minute if you want. But I'll send it out with this. But let's go back to the PowerPoint. The Crash Course guy is very good, and that is no exception. He does a great job with it. But let's go back to our PowerPoint, which here is Aristotle, if I can get it. There we are, Aristotle. And back we come with Aristotle here. There are a couple of things he didn't cover in his video that I'd like to tie in, and that would be, I think, quite helpful. If we can get our PowerPoint back up. There we go. So let me make sure I'm giving you your screen here. All right. So he talked about what virtue is and finding the mean. And he talked a little bit about being rational and social animals. There you can see a little bit later what did Socrates do, the role of habit and training. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not a act but a habit. This has to do with Aristotle's political philosophy, and it just says the purpose of law and government is to help everyone live as if we're friends. Well, let's get back to that. Okay. So Aristotle famously defined human beings as rational animals. We can speak, we can do math, we can appreciate art, we can create art. We have powerful ability to think abstractly, and we have a strong sense of self-consciousness, and that is reason. But reason is intimately connected with communication and particularly language for Aristotle, and you can't have language on your own. Language is always communicative. Reason, therefore, is communicative. meaning, according to Aristotle, we are actually social animals. So you can see the quote, human beings are by nature political animals, Aristotle says. By political, he doesn't mean we are all a member of a political party or we have strong political views in our sense. He just means we're all part of a civil society. Everybody's part of the decision-making body that is the community together. And he actually says you're not human if you're not these things. So social animals, we live in groups. Human beings have always lived in groups together. Human beings have always been communal and not solitary creatures. We have always been part of a kind of society. We have always been part of a community. And our very humanity is inseparable from that. This is particularly important when you consider the history of Western philosophy. The Western philosophy over the last 500 years or so has been increasingly individualistic, where you think in terms of I am a unique individual and I'm largely responsible to myself. And my main relationship with other people is to respect their privacy and leave them alone. And that may or may not be true, but that is our point of view in many ways, increasingly in Western and particularly American society over the last several hundred years. Aristotle doesn't think that way. Aristotle thinks of the self as embedded in a social context. We are who we are because we're a part of a particular community. We are part of a particular set of social relationships. We're born in a particular time and place in a particular country. We're in parts of groups of other people, and those groups make us who we are. So the self is not individualistic in our modern sense. It's relational for Aristotle. You find this in Confucian philosophy over in the East. You find it in strands of philosophy in different African countries and Native American countries. It's pretty widespread throughout the world. And that is that the self is relational. I'm not primarily an individual who secondarily has relationships. Rather, I as an individual am simply a center point of all my various relationships. I am somebody's child. I am somebody's father. I am somebody's husband and friend and sibling. I'm somebody's teacher. I'm somebody's student. I'm somebody's neighbor. Those relationships are not only essential to me, they absolutely define me and make me who I am. I am not a person apart from my relationships. The self is fundamentally interrelated. It's relational. And Aristotle's main way of expressing this is to talk about friends. And so there's a great deal of Aristotle and his theory of friendship. I encourage you to look that up. We're not going to go too far into it, but I will say this. The word, great group of friends right there. My son loves Winnie the Pooh, so actually both my sons love Winnie the Pooh. But Aristotle uses the word philia when he discusses friendship. It takes up 2 out of 10 books in his ethics, so he spends a lot of time on it. It's a Greek word that really means a kind of affection or love or cherishing those who are near and dear to us. It can talk about family love or milder forms of affection, like I love, my dear old neighbor or something, but typically does mean what we think of by friendship, which Aristotle understands as involving mutual affection and respect. Okay, and he talks about these different types of friendship. Let's not go into them now, but notice the quote: "Without friends, no one would choose to live, though he had all other good things." And Aristotle is very clear about this. Human beings were not made for solitude. It's not how we work. We need close personal relationships, particularly friendships, because that's how we become who we are. We can only be human together. We can only flourish together, and for better or worse, and mostly if we do it right, for better, according to Aristotle, we're in it together. That makes us who we are. Also, Aristotle's theory of society. Why do we have laws? Why do we have a government? Why do we have a civil society with complex institutions? Well, look, not everybody can be close and personal in a big enough in a society. It just can't be. So the purpose of laws and of government, of policy, is to help everyone, all of us, live as if to some degree we are in fact friends. Okay, we're not all friends, but we can have some of the mutual respect and how did I put it before? Mutual respect and affection. If not affection, at least mutual respect that friends have with everyone who comes into our community. Okay? That, in a nutshell, is Aristotle, and it's a good way of understanding what he's up to. Okay, so I'm going to send you some other materials about Aristotle as well. And this is a good place to really think seriously because it's quite an alternative to the other theories that we have. All right. Take care of yourselves. Be well. Make sure you're staying safe and that you're also finding ways to be well and be okay during this lockdown. I will see you again soon. Thank you.